Welcome to APG Pathshala program. Myself Meenal Katarnikar, Associate Professor from the Department of Philosophy, University of Mumbai. In this session, we are going to discuss concept of propositions as discussed by Russell and the Nyaya and the grammarians in Indian tradition. In this session, the discussions will be mainly based on the outcome of the Pandit Philosopher project, which was conducted by Professor Dayakrishna and others in India few years ago. So here we will discuss the concept of proposition as expounded by early Russell and its comparison with the Nyaya concept of proposition as well as the grammarian's concept of propositions in Indian tradition. Samvada or the dialogue between the two philosophical traditions is the edition of Dayakrishna, and it was published by the Indian Council of Philosophical Research, New Delhi in 1991. It is a record of week-long dialogue on early Russell's theory of proposition and Nayayika's response to it, organized by the Indian Council of Philosophical Research, New Delhi, between philosophers trained in the classical Indian tradition of philosophizing and those trained in the Western tradition as well. The purpose of this dialogue was to make the understanding of Russellian proposition pointedly clear for enabling the Indian Sanskrit Pandits to find a response to it from Indian thinking if there is a parallel concept. The dialogue had bearing on concepts like sentence, word, meaning, knowledge, belief, truth. This is an area, as Professor M.P. Rege says in his introduction, which overlaps epistemology and ontology as well as formal logic with its formalized syntax and semantics. So the comparison between Russellian idea of proposition and the Nyaya and grammarian counterpart would be very interesting and illuminating. Many diverse points were presented and discussed during this dialogue, and it is almost impossible to even summarize them in this small session. We will concentrate only on major points concerning the theme, namely the concept of proposition in its comparative perspective. Our lesson will be divided into two parts. In the first part, we will discuss and we will try to understand the proposition according to early Russell with its different dimensions. In the second part, we will try to understand and discuss the views of the two Indian philosophical systems, namely Nyaya and Vyakarana, that is grammar. And the lesson will certainly end with some concluding remarks, criticisms and interesting comparisons. So let us go to the concept of proposition as expounded by Russell. We are familiar with the term sentence, but the proposition is a newly coined term by early Russell to create a link between sentence and fact. We all know that sentence is composed of words consisting of subject, predicate and their relation. We are going to have example for this henceforth, but just to know, when we say Socrates is mortal, we are having a subject, namely Socrates, we are having the predicate mortal, and we are designating the relation between Socrates and mortal by the word is, which is a verb in the sentence. So as we can see, the verb in the sentence creates a relation between the subject and the object. It is the entity, that is, sentence is the entity. We speak and write differently in different languages, which differs in shape, size, tone, etc., but expresses the same meaning, and this same meaning is designated as proposition by early Russell. Along with this, Russell finds it necessary to talk about the facts. What are facts? Fact is what is meant by a true sentence. If a proposition corresponds to a fact, it is true. According to early Russell, there are facts over and above things, and that unless there were facts, sentences could not be decided to be true or false. So facts are required to designate the truth values for the sentences. Facts have to be admitted for the purpose of the truth and falsity. It is the state of affairs. To use the Indian term, it is the vastu sthiti. To link between the facts and sentences, we have the proposition. Proposition is the meaning of a sentence that the sentence expresses. As said earlier, there are different sentences in different languages. So when we say Socrates is mortal, this is the English sentence. Socrates martya hai, this is Hindi sentence. Even though these sentences are having different forms in different languages, the meaning that is conveyed by them is identical, and that is what is a proposition according to early Russell. Let us go to the composition of propositions. A proposition expressed by a sentence is composed of meaning of words and phrases of which the sentence is composed, grossly subject and predicate. A subject out of them is the thing or object about which something is asserted. So, in the case of previous example, Socrates is the subject where mortalness is asserted of Socrates. The meaning of the predicate is that which is asserted about the subject. So again in the same example, mortality is the predicate which is asserted of Socrates. Verb in the sentence generally relates the two, the object and the property. So in the sentence, Socrates is wise. Socrates stands for the object, that is individual, and wise is predicate, which means wisdom, that is a property of Socrates, the individual. Is the relation that relates the object with the property and the sentence. The sentence Socrates is wise is made up of these parts, subject, object, and the link between the two, and that expresses a proposition. Thus, the constituents of a proposition are 1. Object, 2. Property, and 3. Relation. Now, when we talk about sentences and their meanings and the relation of the sentence between the facts, anyone would pose this question: what is the need of coining proposition as the independent link between the facts and the sentences? There are three main arguments for postulating the notion of a proposition. First argument is the argument from translatability of a sentence. What does it say? It says that a sentence from one language can be translated into the sentence from another language only because there is something common between them. What is common? There is some common meaning pattern which is constant across the translations, and this common meaning pattern is the proposition. So this is the first argument from the side of translatability. Second argument is this: we do not know whether the sentences are true or false only by looking at them or only by hearing them. We know their truth or falsity by cognition or experience of meaning, the identification of which is not ascertained merely through the sentence but through the proposition. So proposition mainly designates the meaning of a proposition which decides whether the sentence is true or false. So to decide this truth and falsity, we require proposition. And the third point or the third argument is this: a false sentence does not convey something which is there or which is there as a fact. but the listener understands what is conveyed by the sentence, and what he or she understands is the proposition. So, to understand the purported meaning of a sentence, we require propositions. Now, here we are faced with the problem of empty names, because there could be a term which doesn't have any objective basis in the reality. This is what is called as the empty term. As Russell says, whatever may be an object of thought or may occur in any true or false proposition, I call a term. A term is a thing that has existence. And the question is, can there be a term without existence? Russell admits that there are several non-existent terms. To deny that such and such a thing is a term must always be false. Now consider this statement. Pegasus does not exist. Outwardly, it seems to be true. Pegasus has a meaning, and all meanings are terms. But here, Pegasus does not exist in the empirical world, and therefore it is true to say that something is a term and thus has a being but does not exist. Can we notice one thing here? Russell is making a difference between existence and being. Pegasus has a being. Pegasus does not have existence. So this is a difference between being and existence as made by Russell. Terms like Pegasus and other non-existents have being but not existence in the empirical world. By existence, Russell means corresponding entity existing in the world of experience, and hence having the value of truth. By being, Russell means a term which has meaning but not corresponding value of truth. So, by the difference between being and existence, Russell can meaningfully talk about the empty terms. Now, this distinction between being and existence was not accepted, or rather dropped down by mature Russell. This is a sign of a living philosopher that the philosophical positions are revised as they are found to be incomplete. And in the case of Russell, we find the same thing. He dropped down the idea of proposition, and he also dropped down the distinction between being and existence. As the great scholar in Indian tradition, Arindam Chakravarti remarks, we quote, "The position that there is a sentence, there is a fact, and in between the two there is a proposition is an opinion which Russell gives up when he drops the distinction between being and existence. And since then, he confines his talk to existent objects. He also drops the notion of proposition." So far, we were talking about the Russellian concept of proposition in the early phase of Russell's philosophy. Now we go to the Indian notion of sentence and sentence meaning. And in this context, we will first deliberate on the Nyaya view of sentence and sentence meaning. The concepts the Nyaya system discusses are as follows: Pada, Padartha, Vakya and Vakyartha. Pada is a word. It is, according to Nyaya, the original unit of language that denotes the word meaning. Padartha is a word meaning. It is a meaning expressed by any word. We all know that all the categories accepted by the Nyaya are called Padarthas because they are knowable and expressible through words. To use Sanskrit terms, they are Jnaya and Abhideya. Padartha is individual qualified by universal. Vakya is the third term. Vakya means a sentence, and sentence conveys sentential meaning. Vakyartha, the sentential meaning, is the outcome of the relation of word meanings in a syntactical order. Can we see here the Nyaya attempt to summarize the meaning of a sentence only with the help of syntactical order? This is the reason, probably, because of which Nyaya philosophy does not require the concept of preposition in addition to pada, padartha, vakya and vakyartha. Nyaya discusses the major question: how does one know the sentential meaning? According to Nyaya, the sentential meaning is the outcome of the association of word meanings. This is just now we have seen. In a verbal cognition, the words in a sentential set denote their meanings. The word meanings are known first in a sequence. Then word meanings are retained in memory in order. Then word meanings are associated with the last word meaning denoted by the word uttered in the last, and that association of word meaning is called sentential meaning. So we first grasp the word meaning, then we synthesize those word meanings together in their syntactical order, and that is how we arrive at the sentence meaning. The sentential meaning is true if there is corresponding state of affairs and is uncontradicted. The sentential meaning is false if it has no corresponding state of affairs and is contradicted. So the conditions of truth and falsity are very clear. There has to be one-to-one correspondence between the sentential meaning and the state of affairs. If it is not there, it is false. If it is there, it is true. For Nyaya, there is no need to coin any additional concept of proposition here. Let us compare the Nyaya view with Russellian view. A proposition does not emerge by association, but the sentence expresses it. It can be said that the sentence expresses association of word meaning, and this is quite near to Nyaya notion of vakyartha. So we can see the parallel between proposition of Russell and vakyartha of the Naiyayikas. Vakyartha is made up of parts but not confined to the meanings of parts. It is over and above the meaning of parts. Russell's proposition is also an association of object, predicate and verb that relates the earlier two. So there is something like a jump over and above these three parts, and that jump designates vakyartha for the Naiyayikas and proposition for the Russell. Proposition for Russell. So far as the truth and falsehood of propositions are concerned, Russell accepts something as a fact if the corresponding proposition is true. Otherwise, he would not accept it as a fact. Correspondence with external things is accepted by both the Naiyayikas and Russell as the criterion of truth. For a decision of truth and falsity of proposition in the case of Russell, and for vakyartha bodha in the case of Naiyayikas. So as we said earlier, correspondence is the criterion accepted by both Russell and Naiyayikas. In the case of Russell, it is for the proposition. In the case of Naiyayikas, it is for the vakyartha bodha. Now let us go to the differences between the two, because parallels could be sometimes superficial and we have to go deep into the comparison of the differences between the two. According to Russell, denotation of a proper name is an individual. According to Nyaya, an individual qualified by universal is the denotation of word. In short, for Nyaya, a word always denotes the universal which qualifies the particular. But in the case of Russell, a proper name denotes only individual. In this phase of philosophy, early Russell distinguished between being and existence. It seems that Naiyayikas do not accept a padartha devoid of being and existence and the difference between the two. In some context, we can say the distinction between being and existence is not discussed by Naiyayikas. According to early Russell, facts are there in the world and the world is totality of facts. The world for Naiyayikas is totality of things and not of facts. It seems that the concept of facts is not very commonplace in the Indian tradition. There are things and objects. They hardly talk about the facts. For Russell, facts are acceptable for the truth and falsity of propositions. For Naiyayikas, the truth and falsity is known by the cognition and the corresponding things as per the verbal cognition. A radical difference between Nyaya and Russellian view concerns the interpretation of sentence. Nyaya gives primacy to agent and secondary or qualifying position to verbs in a sentence. As against this, Russell, like Mimamsakas, gives primacy to verbs that not only relate the agent and the property but make the unity of propositions possible, and there is a secondary position to the agent and the property. So for Russell, verb is important, while for Nyaya the agent is primary. Now after Naiyayika's theory of sentences, it is essential that we also discuss the grammarian's view about the sentence and sentence meaning. Even though they are not regarded to be philosophers in the strict sense, in the case of language, their views are essential. And now we are going to discuss the grammarian's view about the sentence and sentence meaning. In their analytic scheme, the Vaiyakarani's or the grammarians do accept separate existences of the meaningful expressions, that is Vachaka, namely words and sentences, padas and vakyas, which independently express their respective meanings, vachyas, that is word meanings, and the sentential meanings, padartha and vakyartha respectively. At the cognitive level, the words express word meanings, that is universals, and accept their existence as intelligible beings in contrast with external existences as beings. In other words, at the cognitive level, the words express word meanings which are universal, and these universals are accepted as the existences in the case of being. Sentence tokens differing in form and shape in different language communities express the being of sentences themselves. First, from which the being of sentential meaning, that is indivisible being, a unit of awareness that satiates the expectancy of a complete sense, Buddhistha Satta, is expressed non-differently. For Vyakarana school, sentence is the original unit of language. Not word, but sentence is the original unit. So far as the words are concerned, expectancy of a complete sense is not satiated by the word universals. So far as the words are concerned, expectancy of a complete sense is not satiated by the word universals and the meaning universals, while the satiation of a complete sense is brought about by the sentential cognition. So from the cognitive perspective, it is not the word and word meaning, but the sentence and the sentence meaning which is the primary unit for the grammarians. Respective external objects or individuals outside them are known by imposition or implication of the universals expressed directly by language on them as their external substratum on the basis of some similarity inherent in the respective universals. So, for grammarians, as we have seen, Sentence being the primary unit of our knowledge, the cognitive context of a sentence and sentence meaning is more important. It is worth comparing it with the Russellian view of proposition. So now we are going to discuss the comparison between the grammarian's view and the Russellian view. Since proposition in early Russell is constant content by which we know that this proposition is the meaning of this particular sentence, and later on it serves as the basis of searching empirical correspondence and deciding the true and false of a sentence, Russell is very near to Vidya-mitra's. So cognitive content of propositions is the common link between Russell and the grammarians. But the similarity somehow stops here, and Russell radically differs from Vidya-mitra's because he takes proposition as meaning, while grammarians accept the being of sentence as the constant content that flashes the meaning. Sentence for grammarians is an indivisible unity, not constituted by words, and so is sentential meaning. The parts are derived by artificial analysis of the indivisible sentence to make the undivided understandable to those who can understand it only through a piecemeal scheme. Russell never says that proposition is undivisible or undividable and analyzed only artificially into parts. According to grammarians, sentence and not the proposition or meaning is given before us for analysis. A sentence or a sentential cognition can only be true or false. One can abstract several instances and occurrences of a sentence and give that abstraction a name proposition, but that cannot be Russellian proposition or meaning. The idea of proposition either as meaning or as the class of synonymous sentences is logically and cognitively inconsistent for the grammarians. Now, what are the conclusions on the basis of this discussion? One can say that on ontological status of propositions, it can well be said that they are abstractions, abstracted from the sentences. If a proposition is an abstraction, then it will be subordinated to the sentence from which it is abstracted and the mind which abstracts it. It is clear that there is no room, especially in Nyaya and Vyakarana, for a concept like proposition because they accept verbal cognition or awareness to be either true or false. Secondly, it is in view of the conflict between proposition as meaning and it as class of synonymous sentences and between being and existence that Russell might have felt that the concept of proposition cannot resolve the conflict, and that might have led him to leave this concept in his later philosophical thinking. In all the dimensions of this discussion, the comparison between early Russellian view and the Nyaya and grammarian's view of the propositions is interesting. To know more about it, one has to refer to the original write-up on this unit. And for more details, you have to refer to the reference list that is mentioned at the end of the write-up. So, thank you very much.